Hey there, my friends. It's Dr. Anthony Balduzzi, and I want to welcome you back to another episode here on the Fit Father Project and the Fit Mother Project podcast. Today, we're joined by an absolutely wonderful guest expert, Justin Frandson, who is a world-renowned athleticism and performance coach. He's the founder of Athleticism.com and EMFRocks.com, and he's been working in the field of athletic performance for over 25 years. He's also the author of a book called Athleticism, Whole Body, Whole Brain Plus Performance, which delves into the connection between athletic performance and the environment. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring Justin on today, because he is a man that just doesn't understand like the health, fitness, performance side, but he's also really diving in and being a champion for the fact that in today's day and age, we are surrounded by electromagnetic soup of microwaves, radio waves, and all these non-native EMFs. And in Justin's career, he realized that a lot of these factors were affecting the performance of his athletes. And some of his athletes were breaking down due to the effects of wearable technology. So he really started to dive into this. And he also started to look for solutions to really offset some of this EMF damage. So my promise to you in this conversation is if you've ever been curious about the effects of Apple Watches or your cell phone or your Wi-Fi router, we're going to get into some of the real science and biological effects of non-native EMF fields. And we're going to get to hear the story of a man who's really championing this work in the world. So, Justin, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Pleasure to be on. Thank you so much, Dr. Anthony, for having me.
So, I mean, this is an unpopular conversation in some sense that we're about to have, but you're no stranger to having it. The fact that we have a very modernized world where everything is Bluetooth, zinging and zagging around, and there's a lot of just like fields that we're putting out there to send data in a wireless way. How did you get passionate about this? And like, what's some of your backstory? Take us into how you got passionate about this topic, and then we'll get into some of the science and some of the effects that you're seeing with your athletes and other people.
Definitely. I started Athleticism.com 25 years ago doing nerve work for sports performance and looking at the body in a whole different way. I treat concussions and do lots of fascia work, and list goes on and on. But what I saw was our athletes breaking down from wearable technology. And that's what dove me into this whole EMF topic and the understanding of how we're different than the man-made electricity and then how it affects us.
Okay, so when you say your athletes were breaking down, what were you specifically noticing, and how did you like track it to the wearables themselves as opposed to other stressors and environmental factors?
Well, one of the strongest, fittest endurance athletes comes through the program, and his whole left arm went weak, and he just happened to have a smartwatch on his wrist. So I'm like, hey, get that radiation off your wrist. And the pain directly below the watch went away right away, and then his functionality restored shortly thereafter. So that was the point where I knew I had to dive into it. And everyone looks to nature to get grounded, so I knew nature would have the answers. And so we looked that direction. And even before that, I was the last guy to get a cell phone. I'm really sensitive to energies. Even when I would talk on a corded phone, I for too long with an old girlfriend, I would feel the challenge, the buzzing, and it would be painful. And I'd be like, hey, what's going on? This thing's corded. It shouldn't bother me, but it did.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point that you do bring up, is there seems to be a big variety in people's sensitivities to these things. There are some people who are very electromagnetically sensitive, and they can even, sense fluxes in weather and the ionosphere, electromagnetic like fields out in the planet, as well as let alone cell phones making people very sick, nervous system related disorders, pain, ringing in the ears, sleep disturbances, and other people seem to be kind of like resistant. If people are not noticing these things and they like, I use a cell phone all day, I feel fine, is that a sign of good health, bad health? And what do you make of any of the individual differences?
Well, that's a great question. I'm smiling because you're hitting all the notes. Normally, I'm the guy that knows all the information behind it, but your backdrop, those questions are fantastic. A lot of the times, it's a lot of different scenarios for it. So people can be sensitive if they're too young, too old, they don't have the defense strength mechanisms at those durations of their life. If they're Rh negative, they're stronger. I'm positive, so I'd be more susceptible to it. If they've had more toxicity exposure, which I did at a certain point, I had a college dorm room. The other side was a big power line transformer outside of my bedroom literally out on the adjacent wall to my bed. And then if someone has heavy metal toxicity, or more introduction to nuclear as well. I live within 25 miles of a nuclear power plant, just under 25 miles in proximity to it growing up. So the combination and then how well they methylate and are able to flush those toxicities out of them, I think a lot of those fall into the levels of sensitivity. There is an awareness component too. I feel people that are more in tune with energies. I do lots of applied kinesiology and muscle testing, and I've done it for 30 years. So I'm really good at feeling energies and reading energies and having that intuition, seeing what makes sense and what doesn't. The people that aren't as aware of those things, maybe it's just not in their bandwidth at that time. So there's just a lot of reasons for it, and maybe they are a little stronger or more resilient for the aforementioned reasons.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes back to the fact that these bodies are getting so many different kinds of inputs all the time. There's genetic factors, there's environmental inputs, and then, obviously the psychological awareness aspect of all of that. Can we back up a little bit and just define EMF, or electromagnetic radiation fields, and how, let's kind of frame the discussion on what those energies are, what that spectrum is, and then kind of define native versus non-native EMF. I want to make sure people kind of understand some of the basic science, so it's not just all wizard magic stuff, and they have a little more teeth behind their understanding.
Definitely. So electromagnetic fields, EMFs, they can be fields or frequencies, and they can be native or non-native. Non-native is all the man-made stuff. And all man-made waveforms are one directional, or they don't work. So that's really the challenge at the essence. These waveforms are made, they're polarizing speeds, or polarizing positive charge, and they're 10 zeros faster, at least the wireless ones are, than how we sleep, rev, and optimize. And so that's really the difference. We're not made off of one directional waveforms. If you drop a pebble in a pond, the resonance and the splash of the pond doesn't go in a straight line to the right or left or up or down. It's a wave that distributes equally in every direction. That's the framework of our entire universe and us. They're called scalar waves. So they're waves that are unpolarized that distribute equally in every direction.
So it's the higher energy aspect of it. And for people's reference point, it's let's just talk about 5G, for example, which stands for fifth generation of wireless technology that operates, I believe, in, let's just say, anywhere from the 10 to 70 gigahertz range. And it might be slightly off, but a gigahertz is 10 billion cycles per second, right? Or something like that. It's and the Earth naturally has a resonance of about anywhere from 8 to 100 cycles per second. The Schumann resonance has been kind of interesting lately. So just understand the magnitude of the stuff that we're putting out is so different than what we were kind of born and connected to. Can you speak into that?
Definitely. So even if it's lower level, let me back up a little bit. Even if it's lower level, Dr. Martin Paul at Washington State University talks about the voltage-gated calcium channels opening up. So think about that word, voltage-gated. That's a gateway for your mitochondria function. So that's where the gateway for your mitochondria to actually generate the ATP, the energy. That's disrupted right out of the gate, even with low-level radiation. So the milligauss is measured in 50 to 60 waves per second. Dirty electricity spectrum would be 4,000 to 100,000 waves per second. And then the wireless are 50 million to billions of waves per second. And 5G, the bandwidth is 60 to 90 billion waves per second. They roll out our wireless communication at 2.45 gigahertz or 2.45 billion waves per second at the same bandwidth that starts to destructure water. So really challenging because it's destructuring, we're literally dehydrating us and our planet. And going back to the Schumann resonance, it varies but it's as low as 7.83 hertz or waves per second, depending upon the season. And Dr. Anthony, when we're sleeping, I know you're aware of the delta and theta brainwave states. That's when we're in a deep state, sleep for rest and restoration. And the theta is the creative state, the 4 to 8, where Einstein would hold something in his hand and fall asleep in a chair and to drop that so he could wake up in that theta state so he could create. Those are where they're 1 or below 1 to 8 hertz or waves per second. When our athletes are in the flow state and they can't miss, everyone calls it in the zone, they're 8 to 12 hertz or waves per second. So we rev really one with the universe in that low and slow brainwave state.
I just want to highlight that because I think that was such a powerful point that you said. Like, these alterations in our different experiences of consciousness correspond with electrical activity of the brain at certain frequencies. And when we're getting into these deeper frequencies, whether they're the more creative, profound things or just slipping into the zone or into deep sleep, the brain's electrical activity is slowing down. And it's actually very close to the Schumann resonance, but although even slower than that, let alone like a 5G, which is just like never experienced by a biological organism ever. And as you said, it also affects the water. So that's absolutely fascinating. So when you go to so many people listening to this may not fully understand the science yet, but they may have an intuitive understanding that I probably know my phone's not great for me, or I shouldn't be around a Wi-Fi router or a smart meter all the time. How do you begin to talk to coach athletes and people who come to you for help on how to like live life, but still mitigate some of their EMF exposure? What are some practical tips on how to like clean up the home or just do other things like this?
Definitely. Well, the first part, Dr. Anthony, is to really understand the framework of what we're built on, and that we're in this living collective intelligence matrix where our air, we'll lean on the air part. Everything around us is our environment, but our air is the atmosphere. And that's where the ether or plasma, where waves and particles travel through. That's how we're able to communicate. So once we understand how everything works, and then when you introduce something that's 10 zeros faster, that's polarizing for our body, it will decharge us. That chips away our life force and our health. Then we start to understand that concept of something's different than how we're designed, and then it can affect us. And then what we go is we start to look at what are the sources. And so there's meters that are made to measure the speed of those different wavelengths that I mentioned. And so you can get a milligauss meter or a Stetzer electric meter to measure dirty electricity and plug it in the wall. It's a great meter. And then you could get an acoustometer, like a one directional meter. So I like to get a meter and point it at a cell phone, because the cell phone here looks all quiet. It doesn't sound like it's making noise. The second you point a meter at it, it starts screaming. And the noise that the meter makes is what our body hears, what our nerves hear, what plants hear, what pets hear. And it's noise pollution. And most humans can't hear that bandwidth, but that's what we're dealing with at all times. So I really encourage the meters to understand what the stressors are. And then there's 2 other steps: develop proximity protocols to it. So shut down devices and get your home as close to the resonance of the earth, and at night especially. And then get outside and get grounded by nature, because nature has this incredible medicinal bandwidth to heal us and frequency to heal us. So there is a physics component here. This is the best part about this whole talk.
Yeah.
You can convert a one directional waveform into something that's unpolarized that our bodies accept. Getting out in nature is free. That's the best way to do it. The second best is to use our grounding bags, when you're inside the home. And that's what's going to literally bring the resonance of the earth to your home so we can coexist with this in our electrical boxes of our home.
I want to talk about your grounding bags in some of the solutions in a little bit. Before we get there, though, I think I want to emphasize, as a man who has an acoustometer, it's behind me, and I measure all sorts of different kinds of things just to get data, because you can't see these things. Some people can feel them, but you can certainly measure them. Like the big thing is the cell phone is probably going to be people's number one source of like radio frequencies, like period. And these are coming, what, like, so people know, in the microwave range. Like this is what the cell phone is, a microwave emitter. Like this is what it is. And the proximity thing you mentioned is good because like there's a huge difference between if you have the phone, you know, a foot from your face versus like even like 3 or 4 feet away. Like the mitigation in the distance is massive. Just like a Wi-Fi router, you can have Wi-Fi in your house, but if you're on the other side of the house in your bedroom, there might not even be that much. So I think the proximity is like a massive thing. Can you speak into that and some of the readings you've had on that?
Yeah, they have a SARS absorption rating of like 1.6 watts that you're allowed to do. And so they make these cell phones. So they test them away from your body every inch away. It's just exponentially safer for you. So these ratings are just know that we're an antenna. We're absorbing this stuff. So that's not optimal, you know, for our body to have that. We want to develop those buffers for us.
And kids have a higher absorption rate too, because by body weight, they have higher amounts of water. And let alone all these kids right now are glued to iPads and like phones and stuff like this all the time. Like it's kind of sad because it absolutely does influence the nerves and the neurons, how the mitochondria function. It opens up those voltage gated calcium channels, which can actually damage the DNA when calcium rushes into a cell. So it's like, there's like real science behind this stuff, but I guess it's kind of like unpopular to chat about. So like, why is this not like a global conversation? Yeah.
It's ionized radiation, literally. And that's what we're dealing with. And so in 1996, our government set procedural levels. And he said, if something's ionizing, it causes a thermal effect in the body, it's not okay for us. But if it's not ionizing, it's okay. So they're ratcheting up these levels as high as they can and avoiding that thermal discussion. And they're doing it with cell towers outside of homes and smart meters and all the wearables and the computers and smart TVs and Alexas. And I mean, the entire grid, satellites, they're all saying that it's non-ionizing, but it really is. These are bandwidths are in the billions of waves per second. So there's no scratch your head on it for me why we're adapting to all this stuff, because we never seen the electrification of our entire world at this level ever.
And that book, I think you mentioned the author of that book, Dirty Electricity, which is a cool book that kind of goes through the history of like as we started to electrify things, how we saw a big explosion of cancer and heart disease and diabetes and stuff like that. And then I also want to comment on the ionization, non-ionization. So ionizing radiation, in my understanding, is like very high powered energies, things like X-rays and gamma rays. And like slower and lower than that would be microwaves and radio waves, which people say are non-ionizing, and they're probably not. But regardless of whether or not the EMFs ionize, which actually like excites an electron off things and directly can damage DNA, there are non-ionizing damaging effects of EMFs, like the voltage-gated calcium channels you mentioned. It actually messes with the electron transport chain to the mitochondria. Regardless of if DNA is damaged through an ionizing process, like there's still damage in non-ionizing effects. So that is the big industry talking point, is only, oh, it's non-ionizing, so it's safe. But we're far more complex than just that. Like ionizing radiation, like UV, for example, ionizing affects us, but other things do too.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about one directional waveforms. We got to go back to the simplicity of how they're made. A cell tower has panels facing every direction because those waves have to point in that direction for it to work, or it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So we got to really understand this makeup of it. And the book that describes it the best is The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. And he categorized the history of electricity and light. And he really categorizes back to 1889 when we first introduced electricity in our homes and beyond that.
Yeah.
So they called the flu before that time because it would fly in and fly out with the cosmic shifts, as you spoke on, solar flares, pressure shifts in the atmosphere, atmospheric shifts. Our bodies will adapt to, REM patterns will change. It directly affects, our system. And then once we introduced electricity into our homes, the flu was here to stay. That's crazy from just that point alone. But in 1918, we rolled out radio waves. Yeah, maybe they're not ionizing. I don't know. But every place that broadcasts the radio waves or has radio station, there is a huge cluster of health challenges. So 1918 was the first time they rolled out radio waves, and that was the Spanish flu. So a lot of people got sick and adapted to that, and many weren't able to. And then the satellites in the Van Allen belt for the Hong Kong flu, and then World War II was radar. And then everyone knows the last several years, 5G. There's no scratching your head on this stuff. We can make a phone call internationally in a split second. Now you can easily broadcast a frequency and a bandwidth across the entire country in a split second. So there's no scratch your head for me.
Yeah, and I think it is important because there's a lot of natural resistance to this idea that these things that we hold so near and dear, that our lives kind of like our modern lives depend on, could be this damaging. That I want to give a plus again for that book you mentioned, The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. It's on audiobook as well as paperback. You read that book, it will blow your mind. And it has all the science of the biological effects in the back half, but the front half of it is all about the history of how the world became electrified. You gave a really nice high-level summary of that. And it was interesting, when the radio waves were rolled out, that's when we saw bees starting to die. The guy Marconi who invented the radio waves on the Isle of Wight, like he had like a lot of health issues and he died prematurely from all that stuff. Like, this is a deep conversation and it's like inconvenient, but I'm glad we're helping people. These people become aware of these things, and knowledge is power. You got to start measuring and you got to start reading so you can be convinced of these effects. So with this, it's not all doom and gloom, because you clearly started a company that has found natural technology, if you will, to mitigate some of these things. So talk to me about EMFRocks. How'd you discover this, and what does it do again, like to the waves, and how is it beneficial for people in their homes?
Definitely. Well, let's talk about how our body battery works, and then we'll kind of get into the grounding part and how that is so beneficial. So Eileen McCusick wrote a book called Electric Body, Electric Health. And she talks about the body being a body battery, where we get a negative charge from the earth and pull the electrons from it. We get a positive charge from the unpolarized light of the sun that distributes equally in every direction. Like, here's my hand, there's still light underneath it. So distributing equally in every direction. And then we get the minerals from the air and different environments. Dr. Zach Bush will talk about breathing in the microbiome and different environments to remineralize our system. And then also, hopefully we get it from some of our food if you're getting regenerative, sustained sources. And then we drink the water for the conductivity of it all. And that's really at the essence of how our body battery works, Dr. Anthony. And when we're out in nature, we're going to feel the best we've ever felt, because our bodies are being charged. It's really challenging everyone to heal and perform at the highest level when you're decharged, when you lose the polarity in your system. And what I've seen clinically is the eyes, the teeth, your thymus, which is your upper chest, and your large intestine, the intestine area below your belly button, are the 4 areas that get decharged by EMF the easiest. So for me, it's easy to make an athlete stronger, because when you can get their joints, their weak links, stronger, the whole becomes stronger. When we can recharge those areas that are the weaker links for EMF, the whole becomes stronger. And then we use our grounding bags to actually clear the biofield. And Dr. Bruce Lipton will talk about our body being energy first. So the chi, our energy, our biofield, which ironically goes out about 6 feet, is where our health lies. Our chemistry is secondary, because we get the chemistry from the energy, and then we get the biology after that. So a lot of times we get those things switched around, but our energy field is what we really want to focus on, and getting in these natural resonances will help do that. And what we did with the grounding bags is we found an incredible mine that has moisture and magnetic properties, not just like shungite or amethyst or black tourmaline that have the known magnetic properties. Ours has a moisture content in it. And that's why they're exponentially better about eliciting that grounding effect when they're in it and are around us.
So these, we basically have a bag of these special rocks effectively. And these rocks have magnetic and they also have some hydration to them. And that harmonizes an environment that we're in. So you'd put them in like a bedroom or something like this. And now we have a more natural EMF zone. Is that the concept?
Right. So what we did is we hand mined crystals. The crystals have moisture and magnetic properties. They're beautiful pink crystals. Unfortunately, we can't really display them out or wear them with pride. But what we can do is we can deploy them in these grounding bags, and you got to keep them sealed so it preserves them. They'll last for several years as long as you keep them sealed. But they have the moisture magnetic properties, and what they do is they create a coherence between us and the non-native waveforms.
Okay. That's interesting. So if you were to take an acoustimeter or some kind of measuring device that would measure a cell phone radiation, does it actually like go down in the presence of these things, or is it more that it's just a harmonized field beyond the measurements of an acoustimeter?
There are ways you can lower and get meters or get our products to show that meters meter less signal strength. That's not the game we're playing. What I'm looking at is your bio measurements, your body. How does your body respond to it? So Dr. Berlando, alphabetic.com, he did a waveform test. So he has dual impedance antennas, and they measure your chi and any distortion in your chi. And the grounding bags clinically passively treated up to 91% of the markers that were off from the EMF being present in the body. That's phenomenal. He's never seen or tested a product that can clear at that level. The lowest was 67%, and her thymus was decharged. But if we would have done the tapping protocol to clear, you tap on the bag and you cover those areas, she would have been off the charts. I don't even know what the score would have been, but we had to do a passive test. But the grounding bags create that coherence, so we're ended up getting good from these devices. It's amazing what physics can do.
For sure, because it is just physics and understanding of different waveforms, and like, you know, it's beyond my understanding the exact specifics of it, but I'm working on it as obviously you are, and you have some solutions which are super cool. Okay, so let's talk about what your personal practices are. Do you have kids, by the way?
Yes, I have one daughter. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to know your practices for yourself personally as it relates to cell phones, Wi-Fi routers, and like how you keep your house right, as well as like what you do with your daughter, if anything, to have like healthy, safe life, good performance, still using technology, but not being necessarily damaged by it.
Right. Well, she has her phone and her computer. Obviously, it's best if we hardwire it. That's optimal. We have grounding bags. I do the proximity protocol, so a laptop is never on her lap. Can you imagine a battery and a router over your reproductive organs and selling that?
Right.
That's what the industries are doing. So educating the kids is one of the foremost things for their reproduction and their future reproductive organs to be viable. And so I teach her never to have a phone up next to her head. I teach her not to have a laptop on her lap. And it's always adjacent to her, even if they're getting the millimeter waves. That buffer, that proximity distance, is safe enough. And then we use our grounding bags and to create the coherence between her and the waveforms. And I do the same thing. But right here on my desk, I'm hardwired. So my computer's hardwired. My phone's on airplane mode right now, or I put it inside of a Faraday bag, one of our Faraday bags. And so that's how we develop proximity programs. If someone has to have their laptop on their lap, throw one of the Faraday bags underneath the computer so it repels the frequencies away from you, and then have a grounding bag on your bed or desk to help create the coherence. So there's ways to use these devices and this technology. Another example would be a smart meter, which is an automated gas and electric meter. Josh Del Sol did a documentary movie called Take Back Your Power. Encourage everyone to watch it. But these smart meters are two-way routers that ping every 7 to 15 seconds. So you want to make sure the bed of your kids or yourself are not positioned on the opposite wall of that, or they'll have tremendous health challenges. And I've seen kids grind their teeth to nothing and then have seizures and then autoimmune and cancer and commit suicide from too high levels of EMF exposure. So really looking at your invisible environment and then the tangible environments around you and developing some proximity protocols with it, and then using some shielding when needed, and then definitely the grounding bags to create the coherence, because that's a natural resonance. That's not a man-made device attempting to keep up with man-made signals. That's like eating GMO food. This is nature's way of protecting us.
Yeah. And I guess like also depending on where you live in the future, you know, small cell towers, because those 5G and millimeter waves like have a lot of interference, like they can't go very far without getting blocked by certain things. There needs to be a lot of small relay towers everywhere. And also, I think a lot of the telecom companies have the ability to use people's individual routers, Wi-Fi routers, as relay stations now within terms of service. Like it's like, whether you like it or not, this is the world we're kind of about to live in. And I suppose insofar as you can keep your home environment better and you can sleep better, I mean, at least that's a big chunk of your life that is in a more natural EMF state.
Definitely. They're using the routers in the homes. They'll have hotspots on them so they can connect to them even when you turn it off. They use the cell tower. The smart meters act like a cell tower on your home. We're really being inundated. They're rolling out laws that they could, at their whim, with no due process, put millimeter wave technologies on your home, literally on the roof of your home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really devastating to know that the FCC doesn't care about your health and is just looking for bandwidth when we've gotten away from when fiber optic cabling, DSL cabling, it's faster, it's safer, it's more reliable. There's minimal health challenges, for our body. We're just leaning away from that when we've invested so much into it. Every school should have their kids hardwired. They don't need 30, 40 kids in a classroom with 30, 40 routers plus their cell phones on all the time. That's just causing tremendous, I call it level 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Level 1 is all cognitive, lack of focus, memory, anxiety, fatigue, stress, behavioral challenges, headaches. Obviously, the lack of sleep is a big thing our grounding bags help with as well. But then level 2 would be more severe headaches and migraines, bloody noses, ringing in the ears, non-trauma concussion symptoms, which we saw in the Havana cohort, or Havana syndrome, which is the first attack of U.S. embassy workers on foreign soil with microwave. And then the level 3 would be the bigs: cancer, suicide, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, and then infertility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I guess I would say, like, if anyone is listening to this and doubting this stuff, like, fine to be skeptical. I mean, that's the heart of like a scientific inquiry and investigation. But just please do read the Invisible Rainbow book. Like, I wouldn't shove your head in the sand until you've actually like gotten to see the best modern synthesis of all the data that underpins these things, as well as the story of how it all got rolled out. It's like, it's necessary for people to get the full swath of education with these things, because it's just the facts. And I think it's also because we want to have all this wireless stuff. We want to have everything communicating to everything, smart this, smart that. And there's a big financial incentive not to go develop the infrastructure for fiber optic cables everywhere, rewire a school to have Ethernet ports everywhere. It just costs money. It's easier just to broadcast the Wi-Fi out there. And then the political aspect of it is kind of, you alluded to, is like in the United States, at least, we had the Telecommunications Act of 1996, where the FCC basically took over and made it only a federal issue, where states and local areas couldn't decide what they want to do with these different kind of cell tower deposits. It's like federal only. And so we don't really have a say too much, but you do have a say in your home. And you can do things to have your home environment. So that's something, I guess, if someone is resonating with this before even reading and going deeper into the data, you can make a healthier home. And it sounds like your EMFRocks is a really good place for people to start, as well as, I would say, get your cell phone at least out of the bedroom. You know, you can still have it on if you wanted to not go airplane mode, but just get it not next to your head at night, and then hardwire into your computer if you can. I mean, that seems like pretty easy stuff for people to do.
Definitely. These EMFs, Dr. Anthony, at the first, they mess with the mitochondria functionality, but they're really an oxidative stress on the body. And this bandwidth of destructuring water is a huge topic. Dr. Ibrahim Karim, the founder of biogeometry, is on record of saying that it's dehydrating our entire planet. And in conjunction with the chemical aerosol trails that they're dropping from the skies, there's another colleague, Gary Lineham, and he talks about the silica being depleted in our body from the barium. So we're really, without the silica, the hydration of our fascia and our entire body gets depleted. So we have to use those incredible minerals to get it back into our system and keep our body hydrated, because they keep dropping the levels of what percent our body is of water. You drop 1% of somebody's body water, what our makeup is.
Yeah.
That's a massive amount. So we really have to unlearn what we've been told and taught about what health is. And unfortunately, the telecom industry isn't the only one. We see it in agriculture and the fake foods, and then also in the auto industry. Now they're rolling out electric cars. And this is probably the other biggest topic, is electric cars are not good for your health or the environment. And it's not a net zero. Sitting on a massive battery. I've never read, correct me if you've ever read it, Dr. Anthony, but sitting on a massive battery is not good for your health. It never has been and never would be.
Yeah, I guess my buddy has a really like fancy electric car, and I have taken some of my equipment in there to do readings in his car. His particular one wasn't that bad, but I think that's probably due to the position of the batteries. Like, I'm sure other ones are different if the Teslas have batteries all the way underneath them, but yeah, it's not. There are health effects by being bathed in electric fields. And the electric fields are different than even the microwave emissions from a cell phone, which are different than radio waves. They all have kind of uniquely damaging effects just in general. So it's a complicated world we live in. I wish it was as simple to say, like, eat your fruits and vegetables, move, get outside, and like drink some clean water. But we have a lot of environmental factors right now that you need to know about if you want to be optimal. And what you don't know about can still harm you. That's just unfortunately the facts.
Yeah. Well, we had a colleague test, and he was working with mostly professional athletes and got hired by military to do blood analysis. He threw in a variable of guys and girls driving electric cars. The biggest marker change in all of his blood work was 18% lower testosterone for them driving electric cars. So most of the guys, I live in
That's interesting.
I live in Southern California, like Newport Beach area, and everyone driving an electric car that's over 50 is doing synthetic, testosterone. So they don't feel the effects. If they don't feel the energy, they're not feeling the effects because they're using synthetics to do it, but they're cooking their family while they're in it. I can't sit in an electric car. And when the thing's driving, when it's accelerating, when it's accelerating, what's the difference in the vibration when it goes from 1 to 10 miles an hour, or 80 to 100 miles an hour, or 50, 60, or when it decelerates, or when it's in reverse and when it's charging? We haven't done all the tests. I've done a lot of them, and I know that it's super high. It's upwards of 70 milligauss inside of the car when it should be 1 or below.
Yeah.
According to bioinitiative.org's work. So we know Dr. Martin Paul's work and Todd Watts with Cellcore, Dr. Todd Watts, we talk about the Lyme, mold, parasites, microtoxins, candida, all being charged by EMF. If you want to keep a dad healthy, the last thing you want to do is to give him an crazy invisible stressor close to them.
Yeah. Close to them at all times, let alone the cell phone too, right? That's oftentimes in the pocket at the same time as the car. And you mentioned a website that is good for people to check out. Go ahead. I just want to mention one thing, bioinitiative.org. So bioinitiative.org. If you put in /conclusions, so bioinitiative.org /conclusions, you can see it's a dated report, but it has a lot of this research on fertility and testosterone effects all laid out through hardcore scientists that care deeply about this. So there's preponderance of stuff people can learn about. So continue, please.
Yeah, and get on Arthur Furstenberg's website, cellphonetaskforce.org. He has some incredible emails that he sends out. And I was going to go into proximity protocols with cell phones. We actually manufacture a mini grounding bag, and the minis are great for a pocket, for a purse, or a backpack for the kids. And the deep sleep, these are about 1 pound. These are about 2 to 3 ounces. I have mine in my pocket, and I put my cell phone on the outside of it. So I have a buffer with my cell phone directly, not on my skin. And you could throw them in purses or backpacks, or use the Faraday bags. And, they come in 2 different sizes where you can create those buffers of where these stressors aren't right on your body. They're not a direct stress on you. And what's going to happen is when you put a phone in a Faraday bag, it's going to save the life of the battery, because the reason our batteries die so fast is because the aggregation of information. Every app is pulling all these markers off of us. And so it's a huge privacy challenge, especially when we're giving them away our biometrics, our eye retinas, our face print, our finger, our palm, our voice. We got to slow down this information and develop proximity protocols of awareness of this stuff. These are tools for us to use them, not for them to use us. And another big point I want to make is we got to get out of this meta universe. You got to connect to God. You got to get grounded by nature. That's what's going to help facilitate you healing and keeping your vitality and your life force up. Not having someone, a computer, or something, I should say, tell you how you feel, how you slept, how much steps you took. No, do a baseline test once, and then do an endpoint test, maybe a midline, and then that's your gauge. And then know from there. You don't need radiation on you 24/7. That's not enhancing for you.
Yep, for sure. I mean, you bring up so many good points, and I honestly love that you brought it from my personal experience of truth to the God connection point, because I do believe that living in a way that's more connected to native EMF in these fields is a way for me to live closer to God. So it's like, that's why it's a very motivating and connected experience for me. And a couple other, just to loop back, because we're kind of having a fun all over the place conversation here, is on the blood markets, and we mentioned testosterone. One thing that's very clear, and we've known this for a long time, is when blood itself is exposed to foreign electromagnetic fields, it actually clumps up. They call these rouleau formations, where the red blood cell itself is kind of like a donut, and it's meant to have this nice natural charge on it, and that keeps it flowing and not clumping. But when we get EM fields, the blood gets really clumped up. It gets clotted. And when clotted blood gets all clotted, it can't flow through those small capillaries to your end tissues. It can't exchange oxygen as well. And that's what grounding does. And I'm sure your bag as a grounding device actually does that too. It causes blood to unclump. That's when connecting to the earth causes that. There's a book called Grounding by Clint Ober. It might be called Earthing or Grounding by Clint Ober. It's an amazing book. Yeah, it's an amazing book about, basically, it shows you all the blood on electron microscope slides and stuff like that of the clumping and the unclumping. And it also shows you how athletes have been using this for a lot of time. The Tour de France cyclists, a lot of them, at least at the time of writing the book, slept in grounded bags, like sleeping bags that were grounded, because it healed up recovery times. Wounds heal faster when you're connected to native EMF, and blood flows better. Those things are obviously connected. More blood flow, more healing, all these things. So there's a lot going on here. It affects every system, period.
Yeah, definitely. The circulation is challenged and compromised. When that blood rouleau sticks and stacks, you're going to start to see that function, really be diminished in your body and your energy field, the chemistry of your body, everything, and then the biology of it all. So I feel getting grounded by nature is the number one most important element to health, and it's probably one of the biggest one that's missed by doctors. When was the last time, people went in and said, and their doctor said, "Hey, get outside in nature more often"? I mean, it doesn't happen that often. Obviously, with guys like you that have more awareness, those are part of your protocols. But across the board, most people don't think about that. Most, and especially in the Western medical genre, don't even talk about it. I mean, our tribe's naturopathics and chiropractics and acupuncturists, and we do have a lot of aware MDs that sell our products, and we sell these grounding bags through doctor clinics all around the country. So I'm one of the few that gets to talk to more doctors than most, and they are not typically prescribing nature as a way to heal right out of the gate. And it's free.
Yep, it is. And you know what's really interesting? It's like, I think we think of history as being so linear and progressive all the time. Like, we're constantly building up and becoming more wise. Yet if we look around into the health effects today, we're in worse shape than we were 100 years ago. Like, obesity, diabetes, heart disease wasn't rampant like it is today. So are we really wise? And what I think is fascinating is that, like, hundreds of years ago, a lot of the European physicians, when they had people coming in with chronic illness, they would prescribe fasting and dew treading. And dew treading was the practice of walking on the morning dew when the grass is still wet and it's more electrically conductive. They'd say, take a walk on the grass, and they would just basically fast them or feed them certain kinds of broths. Now, did that cure everything? Probably not. But like, they were onto some stuff that they understood on a deep level here. Everyone's now talking about the regenerative capacities of fasting and now earthing and connecting. Like, we've known this for a long time. And so this is not like new news. It just feels new.
Oh, I mean, those are fantastic points. And to second that, the diabetes thing, and Arthur Furstenberg talks about diabetes never even being able to be found 130 years ago. Literally 6 cases in the entire world were found. He couldn't find it in any research books. And then now, obviously, fake food, it's so rampant, but it's an electrical disease for sure. So, I know you have some great products on your site to roll out, and help burn ketones. And we have a MCT oil called lean oil that helps normalize your mitochondria and the spiking of the glucose. So these are systems that are really important when we start to understand this whole picture. It's not just one thing that's going to get you better and protect your family. It's a really a compilation of all these different pillars of what I call health. It's not, turning down your oxygen, or it's not injecting something into your body. That's not health. As much as the narrative will say that health is living, loving, breathing fresh air, grounding, smiling, sweating, being close to each other, connecting to God, and really exercising, getting the muscles working. You gotta, and staying hydrated is exercise, nutrition, hydration, and owning your power, literally, in the quality, quantity, frequency of each of those. Those are the pillars for health. And a lot of that's free. The part about praying and getting out in nature is free. It just go ahead and do it. And when you want to get that resonance and connect closely, in your home, or if you're in a cold environment where you can't, you use the grounding bags to get grounded inside your home.
Well, I mean, I think that was really just beautifully said. I know we've binged around a lot of places, but that might be the place that we kind of like land, that these things of good living are connected to truth and natural law. Our body needs certain inputs: the hydration, the balance of the nervous system, the sleep, the movement, the social connection to a higher power. And I find it very motivating for me personally, especially if I've been on my health journey for a long time, where I'm past desiring to look a certain way because I have the habits that keep me functioning well, that it's like what motivates me now is just this holistic approach to, like, oh my gosh, this is good living in accordance with God's natural law. I'm like, what else am I to do here but that? Like, that seems the really, really prime mover for me personally. And it sounds like you've kind of that's a big ethos for you as well. So on that note, I'd love for you to kind of give us a concluding thought and also to share with people how they can learn more about your work, if your book's a good thing for them to check out if it goes deeper into these things, and of course, like where they can find EMFRocks and stuff like that if they're interested in protecting their home.
Yeah. So for sure, I think the biggest lane that we want to emphasize is the sleep lane and getting into those deeper sleeps. When you have a cell phone next to your bed with Wi-Fi on and smart meter and solar on a home, that's lots of dirty electricity, there's going to be a higher vibration. And what happens is when your body is attempting to go into the deeper restorative sleep states, delta theta, and maybe you wake up to go to the bathroom, you don't get back into that deep restorative sleep because our brain goes into what we call a twilight sleep, and it tries to figure out what frequency is pinging at it. So that's where the grounding bags come in play, is they'll allow you to get in that deep restorative sleep. When you can get there, all the hormone balancing starts to just come naturally. And Dr. Rodney White, he did a test on his sleep. The grounding bags helped him go from 45 minutes of deep sleep to 100 minutes for 2 months straight. So
nice.
This isn't anecdotal. That's a third party doing an independent doctor study for 2 months straight. They don't do clinical trials for 2 months straight. So there's a lot that we really want to dive into on this. So the biggest part is really get grounded by nature, because that's our nature. And that's where we're going to be able to sleep and heal at the highest level and be such an amazing father and performer in your life and workplace.
Well, I mean, Justin, seriously, powerful conversation. I think for a lot of people going to be very eye-opening. And again, these resources that we mentioned, like listen to this episode again, go read some more, inform yourself. If you have an Oura ring or some kind of tracker thing, go ahead, buy some EMFRocks and do yourself your own little N=1 experiment and see how your sleep improves. That'd be really cool. And I'm sure Justin would appreciate if you message him with what you saw and find with some of your data. But overall, Justin, thanks for coming on today and having this powerful conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Anthony.